Well, this is Beehive Banter, and today with one big difference, both Brent and I are in our own private beehive due to the ongoing and ever-present COVID, the virus that keeps on giving, causing chaos in workplaces, almost causing hospital ED waiting rooms to overflow, along with the seasonal super flu. But that's okay. Health Minister Andrew Little said in an interview, demand is dissipating, he said. This comment, of course, causing outrage, with one Auckland hospital worker saying, that is an absolute lie. Well, is he out of touch, Brent Edwards? And by the way, before you answer that, I must say, here's me stuck in my little cocoon, and look at you and your luxury accommodation there. Lovely.
I'm not sure that he's out of touch, but I think Andrew Little, he probably doesn't quite get the mood and the workforce in the health sector. I think he's reflecting the fact that the government has done a lot for health, and often this is not reflected in what you hear from people within the sector. I mean, the government is spending $24 billion this year on health. It's a 43% increase since Labor came into office. I think one of the frustrations Labor has is that it feels it spends a lot on health, and that it feels it doesn't get the credit for it. And I certainly remember that 1999 to 2008 government, that Helen Clark, the then Prime Minister, was frustrated at the end of that for all of the money that government spent on health, they didn't see the returns that they expected.
But Brent, no one's going to thank them when there's people waiting in corridors or people being referred to GPs paid for with vouchers. I mean, no, who's going to thank them for that?
Well, no one is, but the reality is they are spending a lot more on health. Okay, so that is fact, and that's the debate we always get back to politically: is how much more or less should you spend on health? But as I say, politically, he could be smarter to actually just acknowledge that the health sector and those working in it are working under extremely difficult conditions, particularly those that have been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic.
But let's just say that he did. Let's say he turned around and he said, yep, things are bad. I mean, is that going to make everyone all of a sudden feel a whole lot better? What actually can he do to alleviate this? Apart from, and here's a good suggestion, hire a plane from Air New Zealand, fly it to London and fill it full of nurses or doctors.
Whether you could just fill it full of nurses and doctors immediately, I'm not sure. There is a global sort of shortage of healthcare workers. But I think if he was just a little bit more empathetic, that would just make a slight difference to the way nurses feel, and doctors and other medical professionals who are feeling really under the pump at the moment. And then, of course, continue to accentuate the fact that the government is spending a lot more money. The pay equity deal is there for nurses, which will actually boost their pay by a lot. But of course, at the moment, that's held up by this dispute over backdating it. Nurses want it backdated. They say they were promised backdating, and the government at this stage isn't prepared to do that given the cost. So those are sorts of issues. But, of course, this new body, Health New Zealand, is now up and running, taking over from all the DHBs. We've got the Māori Health Authority also up and running. We've got a new public health agency set up within the Ministry of Health. These are all changes that have just taken place in the last few days. But no one is pretending that there will be an immediate improvement in healthcare as a result of those changes.
You'd think, wouldn't you, that the health minister, being an very strong union man, might be a little bit more empathetic?
Well, you would think maybe empathetic, but also I know that within some of the unions, private sector unions who are affiliated to the Labor Party, there's a degree of frustration with some of the state sector unions, particularly the teachers and nurses unions, in the way that more often than not, they get particularly grumpy and outspoken when Labor is in power, and then in the eyes of some in the union movement, are as meek as lambs when the National Party is in government.
Oh, I almost don't want to say anything after that, so I'll change the subject. Well, as I'm sure most of us know by now, hail to the chief who managed to wing away home after putting enough final touches to secure the EUFTA free trade agreement, meaning up to, ready for it, $1.8 billion by 2035. Of course, the red meat industry not happy, fed farmers not happy, the makers of feta cheese, obviously, we have to relabel, they won't be happy. And I know you've had the entire weekend to look at this, Brent, so I want to ask you an A, B, or C here. Overall, A, a good deal, B, the best we could get, or C, actually sounds a lot better than it is.
It probably does sound a lot better than it is, but it is, you have to say it's a step up from where we've been. But certainly Federated Farmers very unhappy with the deal. The access for dairy and meat in terms of increased quota, not huge. It's a step up, but it's not huge. And actually, when you go back to that $1.8 billion figure, which the government says the expectation of how much more in export revenue the country will be getting as a result of the deal by 2035, well, the European Union, their analysis shows that the European Union, will be getting 4.5 billion euro more from the deal a year. Now, Europe, in terms of two-way trade between New Zealand and the EU, it's already 2-1 in the favour of the EU. So on those figures, this deal does not seem to be shifting that at all.
1.8 billion, actually, 20 years ago would have been a lot. It's not now. What's our trade with China worth? 30?
Yeah, well, you don't sniff at 1.8 billion though. It's still a significant figure actually. And I guess one of the things will be is how much advantage New Zealand businesses take of the deal, because aside from looking at the goods exports, there are also improvements in services. And for instance, New Zealand firms will get access to a $3 trillion government procurement program in the EU if they're able to position themselves to perhaps take part in some of those government procurement projects. So there are opportunities there for New Zealand businesses, and more often than not, I mean, the saying is that you can open the doors to trade and business, but whether business then steps through that door is another matter.
Yeah, but where's the timeline and all this? I read it and it just says by 2035. I mean, how long before,
That's the timeline in terms of expectations. Although I guess if you look at the China free trade deal, I think in the end, trade with China did actually pump up much more quickly than the initial analysis suggested.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is that by 2035, $1.8 billion will be absolutely nothing.
Yeah, but that's $1.8 billion in today's terms, though. So don't think about it as yeah.
All right. Makes you think, though, doesn't it, that if we can get a deal with the EU, why can't we with the US? I mean, they want us to be, even better friends than they are. They want us to join PACS in the Pacific to counter China's ever-increasing presence here. But still, they have tariffs on our steel, no FTA. Yet the source of one of those problems, China, we've got an improving FTA. America's saying, pick us, but oh no, don't expect us to give you anything in return. What's wrong with that picture, Brent?
Yeah, well, that's always been an argument, and it's also interesting in the deal with the EU that the Europeans made in their comments on it a lot of reference to the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the need for sort of greater coordination in these uncertain times. So clearly, sort of geopolitical considerations played a part in determining the EU's approach to these negotiations, even though what would appear, frankly, that they've got a pretty good deal out of it. They haven't given a huge amount away. But yeah, it is a question. Why doesn't the US, if it's really interested in sort of countering, I guess, the growing assertiveness in China and others, that it doesn't reach out to its friends in the Pacific and offer these opportunities for some sort of trade deal? The problem again for New Zealand in any negotiation like that, as we've seen with the European Union, is as the very small partner, you're not always going to get what you want.
Yeah, but we don't get anything. They haven't even lifted the steel tariffs. I mean, let's be honest. Right, moving on. Mallard, the guy who's leaving but won't talk to anyone, last week announced a new role, Commissioner for Parliamentary Standards, appointed to consider the conduct of MPs, and all this to improve the culture. Isn't that the Speaker's job, Brent?
Well, all this comes from the Debbie Francis review around, concerns around bullying, sexism, and what have you in Parliament. And obviously that review did uncover a number of problems and issues and concerns that particularly parliamentary staff, I mean, not all parliamentary staff, but parliamentary staff in some offices, and often it went back to particular MPs and their approach and the way they dealt with staff in terms of bullying and the like. So this is what this independent commissioner is set up to do. So if people do have some sort of complaint they want to make about the way they're treated, they can go to this person, and the initial thing is that the person would try to mediate in that position, but if necessarily investigate any claims of bullying or poor behaviour towards staff.
Because we know the powers that the Speaker has. So what sort of powers is this person going to have? And I put it to you this way, because David Seymour says, for example, they can investigate MPs in their career and they're unelected. And he wants to leave Parliament on his own volition, not pushed out by an unelected, power-hungry dictator. Now, I am putting words in his mouth, so I could be.
You are putting words in his mouth, but I think David Seymour did over-egg the situation as well, in the sense of them being pushed out by this person. They would report back to Parliament. And so I don't think they're going to come in with some sort of power where they'll be, picking on MPs and turfing MPs out of the House or out of Parliament left, right and centre.
Do they report back to Parliament, or do they report back to the Speaker? Because if they report back to Parliament, then what? Parliament's going to censure somebody?
The Speaker's Parliament's person, so he would then have to go to Parliament. I mean, in the sense of, but I guess the idea is that they would be hoping that the person would mediate and get involved to correct any behaviour which might be seen as bullying. I mean, one of the problems is often MPs come into this place and they don't have a lot of experience in running staff. And then all of a sudden they've got an office, they've got a few staff working for them. And, to be honest, some people come in and they get overwhelmed by the sense of stature of being an MP and the power. And it can create some sort of unnecessary behaviour, and it's been reported that clearly that certainly some staff have suffered from being bullied by.
Wow, who would have thought that, eh? By the way, will this job also consider the conduct of the Speaker? Just asking for someone who wants to know.
Yep, and that's why it's an independent of the Speaker. If you had the Speaker doing this, then of course it would be seen as purely political. So
no, I mean the conduct of the Speaker.
Yeah. So, if someone in the Speaker's office was feeling bullied and what have you, they will be able to make a complaint to this person.
Right. Let's look at
who is yet to be appointed. Are you putting your name forward, Grant?
I would be the wrong person. Right. Looking to later this week. Now, it's the Australian-New Zealand Leadership Forum in Sydney, as both countries work together on all sorts of things: economic recovery, health, climate change, etc., etc. Even the opposition have been invited. A talkfest, Brent, or actually something worthwhile?
Well, it is a degree of a talk fest, but it is worthwhile. It has helped move on the economic relationship between Australia and New Zealand over the years. I'm not sure if it's made a lot of ground more recently, and it interests me looking at the agenda. There doesn't seem to be anything specific on the agenda that I saw for Thursday and Friday, where they were looking at specific issues where they could just ease the friction in terms of doing business across the Tasman. So a lot of it, I guess, is natural enough, is around economic recovery from COVID, the health response, but also there'll be a big focus on climate change. So James Shaw, the climate change minister, will be there. And I mean, that's, I guess, a reflection of the change of government in Australia and the fact that this new Labor government has a much, much bigger focus on climate change than the previous coalition government did.
Right, so a talk fest. Well, I'll tell you what, both our countries, here's what I think they're going to say.
Adding to climate change.
Yeah, but here's what I think they're going to say. They're going to issue a statement at the end, and here's my prediction of what it's going to say. Both our countries acknowledge the difficult times the world is currently experiencing. We acknowledge how tough things are and vow to work together to try in every way we can to make things better for all those affected in ways by the situation we all find ourselves in today. Amen.
Very good. Have they given you the job as the communique writer?
Oh, you look at the in communique and compare it to that.
You've got two jobs. You're going to be doing that. You're going to now be running discipline for MPs in Parliament.
I know, it's amazing.
Well,
I know, and well, it could be even better. I could be in your luxury lodge anyway. That's Beehive Banter for another week, and by this time next week, we'll hopefully both be back in the actual Beehive. The PM will be back, Grant Roberts will be back, and over COVID as well, and hopefully you'll be there with us as well. Thank you as usual, Brent, and thank you for listening or watching.